All right, so this is a review of the river section. I'm mainly going to focus, at least with the yellow, on the action of it. So Ants and Dewey Dell and the boy Vardaman get out of the wagon. So does Tull, and they're going to head across on the broken down bridge because you can't drag a wagon across it, but you can walk on it. All right, and let's see. So Ants, when he finally got him to say what he wanted to do, Ants is saying, "You ought to take it. Let them take in your mule," he says. The bridge shaking and swaying under us, going down into the moiling water, like it went clean through the other side of the earth, and the other end coming out in the water, like it wasn't the same bridge at all. Sorry, I guess I should do the accent. Uh, and that them that walk up out in the water on the other side must come from the bottom of the earth. All right, so he's just describing the bridges. You can see it on either shore, and then it dips down. But everybody's describing this river as pretty wild and almost supernaturally dangerous, right? And the last bit of dialogue is Ant saying you should have let them take your mule, and the conversation picks back up over here. What good would that have done if your team can't find the ford and haul it across? What good would 3 mules or even 10 mules do? All right, the ford, hopefully you figured out or looked up, is a point in the riverbed that is taller that they can get their. They can kind of. It's like a what you call it, like a little ridge that runs across horizontally that they can kind of get their feet on. Right now, this is also the first indication that and them logs scraping and bumping at the sunk part and tilting end up and shooting clean out in the water and tumbling on toward the ford and the wading, slick, whirling, and foamy. So there are logs in the river that have been trees that have whatever's been washed into the river. Logs are sort of shooting out of the water. That's the first omen of what's going to happen. Uh, they ought to went back and laid over till tomorrow, I says. Uh, Here's another description of the water was cold. It was thick like slush, only it kind of lived. All right, so the flood again is something that they all recognize as extreme, and he's saying they should have waited till tomorrow. It was like when we was across. So now he's talking. He kind of skips to how he winds up over to the other side and out of the water again, the hard earth under us. I was surprised. It was like we hadn't expected the bridge to end on the other bank on something tame like hard earth again that we had tromped on before this time and knowed well. So when he was in the river, it felt like he was never going to get out. Like it couldn't be me here because I'd have had better sense than to do what I'd just done. And when I looked back and saw the other bank and saw that my mule standing there where I used to be, and knew that I'd have to get back there some way, I knew it couldn't be me because I just couldn't think of anything that could make me cross that bridge ever even once. So he feels like he hasn't even made this decision. Somehow he finds himself on the other side, and he knows it was a stupid idea. Yet here I was, and the fellow that could make himself cross it twice couldn't be me, not even if Cora told him to. So he can't believe that he's got to go back. Right? It was the boy. He said, "Here, you better take hold of my hand." And he waited and held me. I'd be darned if it wasn't like he come back and got me. Like he was saying, "They won't nothing hurt you." So there's something. He's always treated Vardaman better than the father, sort of like an uncle to him, and the boy has some sort of hold over his willpower here. And when I look back at my mule, it was like he was one of these here spyglasses, and I could look at him standing there and see all the broad land in my house sweating out in it like it was more the sweat, the broader the land. And he's getting philosophical about Cora and how she, I don't know, is reasonable about uh, things. All right, and so I'm just kind of focusing on the action here because he is. All of this is mainly shock and surprise that he's found himself crossing this river. With like the Bundrins just have this power over him, just because he kind of gets caught up in their craziness. And him, Vardaman, holding to my hand, his hand that hot and confident, so that I was like to say, "Look at here, can't you see that mule yonder? He never had no business over here, so he never come, not being nothing but a mule." And then he ponders the wisdom of children. Then we was over and we stood there looking at Cash turning the wagon around. We watched them drive back down the road to get to where the trail turned off into the bottom. After a while, the wagon was out of sight. So this is just narrating that Cash has to kind of set up the wagon in the right angle so that it can enter the water at the right spot. Um, they got to. So they're saying let's get downriver a bit because it's going to take some time for him circumventing the land, getting the thing set up. And then he just observes and reports where everybody is. And that gal too, with the lunch basket on one arm and that package under the other. This is something that everybody observes. It's a detail that must be important. And then him again using a biblical imagery. They would risk fire and the earth and the water all just to eat a sack of bananas. Again, he thinks the Bundrins are insane. So just for clarification, that was the Toll chapter that comes after the flashback, which we will talk about later on page 86 of the PDF. Now we're into the Doral section. He's describing the water in his lyrical and poetic terms, which is not unlike what Toll himself said, that it seems like the river has got life to it. And so then we get in yellow, just the straight up narrative. Cash and I sit the wagon. Jewel sits the horse at the off rear wheel. So Jewel is back into their, to their right. The horse is trembling, his eyes rolling, wild and baby blue, and his long pink face, its breathing stertorous, like groaning. He sits erect, looking quietly and steadily and quickly this way and that, his face calm, a little pale, alert. You've already picked up, and I'm not going over it, hopefully. Jewel is impetuous. He wants to just get things done. Cash is overly analytical. Cash's face is also gravely composed. We know now part of that is that he can't swim. He and I look at one another with long, probing looks that plunge unimpeded through one another's eyes and into the ultimate secret place where for an instant Cash and Doral crouch flagrant and unabashed in all the old terror and the old foreboding, alert and secret and without shame. Yeah, that's a weird one, right? But what is the nature of it? They look at each other. The looks are probing. They plunge unimpeded. That means nothing stops them through one another's eyes and into some secret place where they are kind of together, crouching. There is a closeness, is what's being indicated here, and it's probably a description of their sort of psychic connection. Because I've highlighted this blue because we kind of get into that. When we speak, our voices are quiet, detached. I reckon we're still in the road, all right. Toll taken and cut them two big wide oaks. I heard tell how at high water in the olden days they used to line up the ford by them trees. So Cash is trying to figure out where there were two trees that you could look across and figure out where the road, where the ford is under the water. I reckon he did that 2 years ago. Now that this is an irrelevant conversation. When he was logging down here, I reckon he never thought that nobody would ever use this ford again. I reckon not. Yes, it must have been then. He cut a sight of timber out in that here, then paid off that mortgage with it. I hear tell. Yes, I reckon so. I reckon Vernon could have done that. So they go off topic. In this case, Jewel probably got a point. Like, let's get on it. The trees are not there. They're just reflecting on how Toll had made some money by selling lumber, chopping down trees in the woods. So Jewel looks at him, then at me. Then his face turns in that quiet, constant questioning about the scene. The horse trembling quietly and steadily between his knees. He could go ahead and slow it and sort of feel it out. I say yes. So they want Jewel with the horse, which is less likely to get pulled over by the force of the river, to go out and feel things out. He comes up with another plan. Cash is still doing very much like ants, this repetition of something that is kind of a regret that's impossible anyway. I ought to have come down last week and take a sight on it. He's saying, I should have figured out where the ford is last week. And Daryl's like, we couldn't have known. Why would you come down before it flooded and know it was going to flood? He lifts the horse. It shrinks, bowed. He leans into it, speaking to it, lifting it forward almost bodily, it setting its feet down with gingerly splashings, trembling, breathing harshly. He speaks to it, murmurs, go on. So that's Jewel is moving the horse out into the water ahead of them. All right, Jewel, Cash says. Jewel does not look back. He lifts the horse on. He can swim, I say, Doral. Doral is saying that Jewel can swim. If he'll just give the horse time anyhow. When he was born, he had a bad time of it. Ma would sit in the lamplight, holding him on a pillow on her lap. We would wake and find her so. There would be no sound from them. That pillow was longer than him, Cash says. He's leaning a little forward. I ought to come down last week inside. I ought to come down. That's right, I say. Neither his feet nor his head would reach the end of it. You couldn't have known, I say. So this conversation is out loud, right? There are quotation marks around it. Jewel is doing the work. These two are still, one's saying I should have done something, and the other saying there's nothing you could have done. And then we dip into a thought of Darl's, right? There's no quotation marks here, and they're reflecting on when Jewel was a baby. Part of what we have here is a connection because these two brothers, if they remember him being a baby, must have been born first and had some bit of a bond. And we can see that bond here because he's thinking this. We wake and find her so there would be no sound from them. And then in quotation marks, that pillow was longer than him. Cash is also seeing this memory that Doral says and speaks to it out loud. So we can kind of see a connection here where they're kind of waving in and out. What's shared in their minds is not really distinct from what is part of their conversation. So the yellow is the conversation that's continuing, and the blue is them talking, speaking out loud about a vision that popped into Darl's head, just of Jewel as a baby. And he keeps going. I ought to have done it. He lifts the reins. The mules move into the traces. The wheels murmur alive in the water. He looks back and down at Addie. At last, the trees open against the river. Jewel sits the horse, half turned, at belly deep. Across the river, we can see Vernon and Pa and Vardaman and Dewey Dell. Vernon is waving us further downstream. Now, here's where the log sort of becomes an image that we can see coming. It's foreboding until a log comes along, turning slowly. We watch it and see it falter and hang for a moment, the current building up behind it in a thick wave, submerging for an instant before it shoots and tumbles on. They find the ford. You wait. Jewel stops. It ain't on a balance. So Cash is worried about Addie not being on a balance. Eyes are another repeating image. Hopefully you've noted that almost every character's eyes have been described as significant in some way. Jewel's are pale and bleached as chips in his face. So they take the rope. They basically tie the rope to the stanchion of the wagon. That's a post on it, and Jewel goes out ahead, cross upstream of us, embrace it. All right, so Jewel is going to work. Jewel with his horse is going to try to help the wagon not be pushed over by the force of the water. And then there's some more of this weird poetry. The river itself is not 100 yards across, and Pa and Vernon and Vardaman, Dewey and Dell are the only things in sight, not of that single monotony of desolation, leaning with that terrific quality a little from right to left, as though we had reached the place where the motion of the wasted world accelerates just before the final precipice. There's something end-of-worldish about this. It is as though the space between us were time and irrevocable quality. Again, a little bit of his weird poetic thinking. Just talking about the space and distance between him and his family. The mules stand. So this is just a description of them freaking out. Their eyes sad and profound, as though they had already seen in the thick water the shape of the disaster, which they could not speak and we could not see. So that's that sort of time thing. He thinks the animals, he knows at this point, or as he's describing this, the animals seem to know they're about to be ready for disaster. So I'm just tracking Addie here. Cash keeps his hand on it, on the thing. Let's see. This is where they tie the rope and pass it to Jewel, who goes upstream from them a little bit. He lowers the horse. In the pink is the Cash looked back at me, and then I knew that we were gone, but I did not realize the reason for the rope until I saw the log. So he wasn't even sure why they were doing this thing with the rope. But this is the log. It surged up out of the water and stood for an instant upright upon that surging and heaving desolation like Christ. Get out and let the current take you down the bend, Cash said. You can make it all right. No, I said. I'd get just as wet that way as this. So Cash he knows they're about to be hit. The log suddenly appears suddenly between two hills, as if it had rocketed suddenly from the bottom of the river. Upon the long end of the foam, hangs like the beard of an old man or a goat. It's almost like this is happening in slow motion. And then the log finally, as the log rears in a long, sluggish lunge between us, bearing down upon the team, they see it too for a moment. They also shine black out of the water. The log strikes it. The bearded head of the rearing log strike up again, Sorry, I see the beard. Strike and beyond it, Jewel holding the horse upreared, and I'm out of time.